The rain in New England never just falls, it suffocates, wrapping the entire coastal town in a freezing mist. I sat on the cold concrete floor of my late mother's abandoned storage unit. The air smelled of damp cardboard and secrets long buried. My fingers trembled violently as I lifted the cover of a brittle, yellowed leather diary hidden in an old wooden trunk. The ink on the final page was faded, but the cursive words cut through me. A young architecture student named Thomas has been following me. He needs to get close to my daughter Elena. My entire life, my successful banking career, my 5-year marriage, even my adoption of Lily, wasn't a beautiful twist of fate. It was a cold blueprint drafted by a monster 15 years ago. I walked slowly toward the cracked glass window of the unit, my breath fogging up the pane as I stared out into the gray, unforgiving morning. Outside, the rain washed over the jagged gravel driveway, mirroring the slow, quiet shattering of my entire reality. The man sleeping in my bed was a calculated executioner. The next morning, I refused to stay blind. I drove through the storm to the imposing brick archives of the New England Historic Society, determined to trace the shadow of the past. The archive room was silent as a crypt. I requested the original municipal construction blueprints of my family's old estate, the grand house that had mysteriously burned down a decade ago. As I unrolled the large, dusty technical drawing across the table, my heart stopped. Stamped in faded blue ink on the corner was the emblem of a boutique firm, Vanguard Drafting Associates. I grabbed a magnifying glass from the table, my vision blurring with tears as I forced myself to read the fine print of the electrical layouts. There it was, written in sharp, unmistakable drafting print, lead designer and inspector, Thomas Vance. The date of approval was exactly 3 days before the fire that killed my mother. He didn't just happen to comfort me after the tragedy in Boston. He had designed the very house that became my mother's fiery coffin, planning his entrance into my life over a decade ago. An hour later, I was back at the bank where I worked as a senior executive, locking myself inside the cold, steel-lined walls of the private, high-security asset vault room. If Thomas was an architect of lies, he needed money to fund them. I logged into our private terminal, initiating a deep, unlogged audit of the premium real estate accounts he opened. My eyes scanned the lines of code and transaction histories. The monitor glowed against my pale skin, revealing an intricate maze of offshore shell corporations based in Delaware. The financial data on the screen grid spun before my eyes. Millions of dollars were systematically moved under the guise of custom luxury estate developments. I realized the terrifying depth of the trap. Thomas didn't just want a wife, he specifically needed my premium executive bank clearance to launder his dark family funds. The cold, fluorescent white lights of the vault hummed loudly, leaving me completely isolated with the realization that I was his perfect, legal accomplice. I spent the rest of the afternoon hiding at my desk, secretly pulling up the live GPS satellite tracking system attached to our family SUV. The tracking log didn't show his vehicle at any architectural build site. Instead, his car was parked outside a secluded, high-security luxury estate owned by his aristocratic family. High-end surveillance cameras blinked with small red lights on the stone pillars of that estate, guarding secrets that were meant to stay hidden from me forever. As night fell, I drove back to our colonial mansion under the weeping willows, parking 2 blocks away to ensure my car wouldn't be seen from the driveway windows. I wrapped my dark trench coat tightly around myself, slipping silently through the shadows of the backyard toward the hidden side servants' entrance. The heavy wooden door clicked open without a sound. Stepping inside, the vast interior of my own home felt entirely cold, like a hollow, dark tomb. I took off my shoes, stepping onto the thick carpeted grand staircase, creeping upward toward Thomas's private second-floor drafting studio. Low, urgent voices drifted out through the cracks of the studio door. I stopped in my tracks, freezing against the cold wallpapered wall. I leaned in close, pressing my ear firmly against the cold mahogany wood of the door, barely breathing as the voices inside became clear. Inside the studio, Thomas's aristocratic mother, Madeline, was pacing back and forth nervously, her usual expensive jewelry clinking with her rapid movements. Elena is digging directly into the Vanguard drafting archive files, Thomas, Madeline whispered fiercely, her voice cracking with pure aristocratic panic. If she uncovers the real reason why that house fire happened 10 years ago, the police will open a federal investigation and we both go to prison. Thomas stood perfectly still by the window, pouring a neat glass of expensive dark whiskey, his expression chillingly detached and unbothered. She won't find a single thing, Mother, Thomas replied with a low, calm growl. I control the local networks and the digital archives. She only sees what I allow. Just make sure the clinic doctor stays completely quiet about Rebecca's child. I will handle Elena. I've been managing her life since the beginning. Out in the dark hallway, my heart hammered so hard against my ribs I thought it would burst. The world completely shattered around me. Sudden heavy footsteps inside the room moved toward the exit. I turned around instantly, fleeing down the dark corridor on my tiptoes. I burst out of the side servant's door, running blindly back into the freezing New England rain, leaving the mansion behind as the storm began to peak. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my car, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert the ignition key as rain hammered the roof. Suddenly, the dark silence of the car was shattered. My smartphone on the passenger seat buzzed aggressively, lighting up with an unknown caller ID. I answered with a trembling breath. A highly distorted, digital electronic voice filled my ear, sounding cold and mechanical. Elena. You think you know the truth about Lily? Thomas didn't just swap the baby to save your sanity, the voice whispered mockingly. He swapped the baby because your real biological child is still alive. He hid the truth from you for 4 years. The line went completely dead, leaving only the aggressive sound of the storm pounding against my vehicle. My mind spun into total chaos. A second later, a text message arrived. It contained an address to an abandoned industrial boatyard in Rhode Island and a single attached image. I clicked the attachment. It was a grainy photograph of an old hospital newborn identification bracelet with a tiny ink footprint stamp. Printed on the faded plastic band was my true biological name and a date of birth that matched the exact night my life was shattered. Without hesitation, I drove south for hours through the blinding rain, arriving at the decaying, desolate Rhode Island boatyard at 2 a.m. Massive hulls of abandoned, rusted metal ships towered over me like prehistoric monsters sleeping in the freezing dark fog. I stepped out into the pouring rain, my boots splashing through deep puddles of black mud as I walked toward a leaking, dark hangar door. I entered the freezing, hollow hangar. The beam of my flashlight cut weakly through the dense fog, illuminating rows of broken machinery. A slow, deliberate shadow stepped out from behind a rusted boat engine. I gasped as the light revealed his face. It wasn't the anonymous blackmailer I expected. It was Detective Robert, the private investigator I had paid to help me uncover the truth. Robert smiled coldly, holding a heavy stack of unredacted police and medical logs from 10 years ago in his leather glove. Thomas didn't hire me to help you, Elena, Robert said, his voice echoing chillingly inside the empty, metallic hangar. He paid me to lead you exactly where he wanted you. You see, your mother discovered his financial laundering 10 years ago, so he had to burn the house. My eyes widened as Robert slowly raised a dark, heavy firearm, leveling it directly at my chest with calm precision. Thomas is an architect who leaves no loose ends, Robert whispered. And unfortunately, you inherited your mother's dangerous curiosity. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst, realizing my entire life had been an illusion constructed by the man I loved. Before Robert could pull the trigger, blinding beams of white light violently crashed through the rotten wooden doors of the hangar. A luxury SUV roared inside, screeching to a halt in the mud. The driver's door flew open immediately. Thomas stepped out into the pouring rain, his dark hair completely soaked, his eyes burning with an intense, obsessive fury I had never seen before. "Get away from my wife, Robert," Thomas growled, his voice echoing like thunder as he lunged forward into the dark. A brutal, chaotic battle ensued in the mud and shattered wood. Thomas fought not like a refined architect, but like a desperate, wild animal. I watched from the corner in utter disbelief as the two men tore through the old hangar, shattering wooden crates and metal tools. Grabbed a heavy iron pipe from the ground, Thomas struck Robert down with a terrifying force, subduing him completely onto the wet concrete. Thomas turned back to face me, breathing heavily, dark red blood dripping slowly from his sharp jawline. He fell directly to his knees in front of me in the mud, his hands shaking as he looked up with a desperate, obsessive expression. "Elena, listen to me," Thomas choked out, tears mixing with the blood on his pale face. "I burned the house. I laundered the fortunes. I did it all. But the baby swap? I did it because I fell in love with you 15 years ago. I couldn't let your grief destroy us. I literally destroyed your entire world 10 years ago, Elena, just so I could be the only person qualified to rebuild it for you." 3 months have passed since that terrifying night in Rhode Island, and the storm has finally cleared from the New England coast. Detective Robert is behind federal bars, and the money laundering was blamed entirely on him and Madeline, thanks to Thomas's manipulation. We still live together in our grand, beautiful colonial mansion under the weeping willows, and Lily still plays happily in the sunlit backyard. Every single night, Thomas cooks a beautiful gourmet dinner, kisses my cheek warmly, and whispers exactly how much he adores me. I sit across from him at the grand dining table, looking around at the stunning, expensive walls of this beautiful, perfect prison he constructed. I possess the career, the immense wealth, and the son I adore more than life itself. But every time I look into his eyes, I know the absolute truth. I am legally bound to the mastermind of my life's greatest tragedies. And the scariest part? I can never afford to leave. I stood paralyzed in the center of the muddy Boatyard hangar, the horror of Thomas's confession freezing the blood in my veins. Thomas reached out toward me, his fingers trembling, coated in cold rainwater and dark red blood from his violent struggle with Robert. Rain continued to leak aggressively through the shattered, decaying roof of the hangar, casting long, erratic shadows across our broken figures. Sudden, aggressive red and blue flashing lights shattered the darkness outside the boatyard, reflecting intensely across the wet pavement. A dozen tactical police officers rushed through the splintered hangar entrance, their powerful flashlights cutting blinding white beams through the fog. Detective Robert was roughly forced onto his knees and securely handcuffed, looking back at us with a bitter, venomous scowl. Wrapped tightly in a gray emergency blanket, Thomas spoke to the police captain with absolute composure, effortlessly constructing a narrative of heroism. I sat completely silent inside the back of a warm police cruiser, staring blankly out the wet glass window as the emergency lights painted the night. On the floorboard of the cruiser, the thick manila envelope containing the stolen medical records lay safely, a ticking time bomb of dark secrets. We returned to our New England colonial mansion just as a bleak, gray dawn began to break over the quiet, wealthy suburban neighborhood. I immediately locked myself inside the isolated guest bedroom on the third floor, leaning my heavy weight against the cold wood, refusing to let Thomas near me. I walked to the nightstand and picked up a framed portrait of Lily, weeping silently in the shadows. If my real biological child was truly alive, I had to find them. The following morning, I arrived early at my corporate bank office. I locked the door, sat at my desk, and initiated a highly classified audit. I bypassed the banking firewalls to access the encrypted, private offshore trust registries connected directly to the hospital clinic Thomas's family owned. After an hour of frantic searching, a hidden payroll account surfaced, pointing directly to the crooked doctor from my past delivery room, Dr. Arthur Harrison. The database log indicated that Dr. Harrison had abruptly retired 4 years ago, relocating to an incredibly isolated, wealthy coastal estate in Rockport, Maine. I packed a small overnight leather bag inside my office, my heart hammering as I lied to my assistant, telling her I was leaving for an urgent client conference. My dark luxury SUV sped down the empty, heavily fog-shrouded coastal highway, crossing the state line into the cold, desolate landscapes of northern New England. I finally arrived at Dr. Harrison's beachfront home. It was a grand but bleak structure made of weathered gray wood, surrounded by dead grass. I walked up the rotten wooden porch steps under the dark, heavy sky, knocking violently on the heavy main door, demanding a confrontation with the past. The door slowly creaked open to reveal an elderly, frail man with deep lines of guilt carved into his face. Dr. Harrison stared at me in terror. Inside his dimly lit, dust-covered living room, Dr. Harrison collapsed into a leather armchair, burying his wrinkled face in his hands as he began to weep bitterly. I leaned forward aggressively across the coffee table, my voice sharp as glass as I demanded to know what truly happened to my baby 4 years ago. Dr. Harrison pulled an old, heavily sealed medical folder from a hidden compartment in his desk, his hands shaking as he prepared to destroy Thomas's narrative. "Your baby didn't die of a stillbirth, Elena," he whispered hoarsely. "She was born perfectly healthy. But Thomas and Madeline forced me to hide her away to secure a multi-million-dollar trust fund." I stared at the document, my vision blurring completely as tears of pure, overwhelming agony and newfound hope streamed down my pale cheeks. My true daughter was alive. I grabbed the adoption file, rushed out of the beach house, and ran back to my SUV just as a heavy, blinding winter snowstorm began to descend. I drove through the night across the state line, my dark SUV navigating dangerous, narrow mountain roads in Vermont as the snowstorm turned into a whiteout. The car's dashboard clock glowed a cold neon blue, showing 5 p.m. as the dark forest trees around me became buried under thick layers of ice. Behind the steering wheel, my face was a mask of absolute determination. I didn't care about the blizzard, I only cared about the 4 lost years. I finally reached St. Jude's Orphanage deep in the Vermont wilderness. It was an imposing, ancient Gothic stone convent surrounded by skeletal winter trees. I walked up the snow-covered stone steps, my heavy boots leaving deep tracks as I approached the massive, ancient wooden double doors. The heavy door opened to reveal a stern but kind older Mother Superior in a traditional black and white habit, who quietly ushered me out of the blizzard. Inside the cold, quiet stone corridors of the convent, the only sound was the echo of our footsteps beneath old religious oil paintings. The Mother Superior unlocked a heavy iron cabinet, pulling out a large, leather-bound historical registry ledger and placing it onto a counter. My eyes frantically tracked down the columns of handwritten names until they landed on a specific entry, Clara Vance, placed under absolute anonymity. The nun led me to an interior glass viewing window overlooking a beautifully lit, warm playroom filled with colorful children's toys. Sitting on a soft blue rug in the center of the room was a beautiful 4-year-old toddler girl with golden blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. She was my exact mirror image. I pressed my trembling palm firmly against the cold glass window, tears of profound maternal love and paralyzing terror streaming down my face. She was so close. Suddenly, the violent vibration of my smartphone inside my trench coat pocket broke the sacred silence of the stone hallway. I pulled it out. The screen displayed a picture message from an unknown number. It was a live photo of Thomas and Lily sitting in a bright ice cream parlor, smiling happily. Below the photo was a text line from Thomas. "She looks just like you, doesn't she? Come home, Elena. Let's keep our beautiful family whole." He had been tracking me. I looked back through the glass window at Clara one last time, an expression of complete heartbreak on my face. To protect her, I couldn't claim her yet. I turned around and walked away from the viewing window, my head bowed low as I stepped back out into the freezing, merciless winter storm alone. My dark luxury SUV pulled away from the Gothic convent, its red taillights slowly fading and vanishing into the thick, falling white snow as I drove back. I entered our grand New England colonial mansion late that night. The interior was completely silent, dark, save for the flickering orange light of the fireplace. Thomas was sitting calmly in a premium leather armchair by the fire, holding 2 crystal wine glasses, looking completely immaculate and unbothered. He looked up at me as I walked into the room, his intense dark eyes holding a terrifyingly possessive, loving, yet unyielding smile. Thomas stood up slowly, walked over to me, and gently draped a soft, expensive cream cashmere shawl over my freezing, wet shoulders. I stood completely frozen like a marble statue, staring blankly into the dancing flames of the fireplace, my soul completely numb. He leaned down, his sharp jawline brushing against my ear as he whispered, "As long as you remain my perfect wife, Clara will always be safe. We have a perfect life." Suddenly, the shadow of his mother, Madeline, stepped out from the dark corners of the adjacent formal dining room, holding a sleek leather document folder. She placed a legal document titled Asset Management and Proxy Release onto the marble table, demanding my signature to lock my bank clearance forever. Under their unified, intense gaze, my trembling hand picked up the heavy pen, forcing me to sign my own legal imprisonment into their financial empire. 3 months have passed. A high-end local luxury lifestyle magazine sits on our coffee table, featuring a beautiful cover photo of Elena, Thomas, and Lily. Bright camera flashbulbs exploded continuously across a grand ballroom during an elite high society charity gala event that we hosted. I stood gracefully beside Thomas in an expensive emerald evening gown, smiling perfectly and flawlessly for the press cameras, playing my role. Late that night, inside the absolute silence of our dark master bedroom, I sat alone in front of my luxury wooden vanity mirror, taking off my jewelry. With a cold, steady hand, I opened the clasp of my expensive pearl necklace, secretly hiding a tiny, state-of-the-art digital recording microchip inside. I looked directly into my own reflection in the mirror, my eyes dead, cold, but burning with a newly ignited, vengeful spark. The architect built my prison, but I was going to tear it down. Fades to black.